Welcome to the Transection podcast, where we discuss trans and non-binary life to help bridge the gap of understanding between people in our community and those outside of it, and to understand and support us better. With so much unnecessary debate in the media, we want to bring a real and raw experience to a wide audience to bring connection and authenticity to the subject with humor and a first-hand experience.
Today we're talking about what it means to be trans and non-binary. As with most of our listeners, I had no idea about really anything transgender. I didn't, I knew roughly what it meant, but I didn't really have much of a clue. And I'd certainly never heard of what non-binary was. I'd never even heard the word. Literally had no clue whatsoever. But when I was 26, which was back in 2000 and oh my God, how old am I? Oh, it was a while ago. I think I was on Facebook and I saw this word and I didn't know what it meant. Not non-binary, it was something else. But I Googled it and it led me to this article. And this was back when I worked a part-time job, when I was launching my own business doing something else. And I was sat at the desk and my boss was sat opposite me on the other side of the screen. And I was really self-conscious because I read this article and it explained like what non-binary was and all of these different terms for gender, and I just felt my face go really hot and I was like, oh my God, this is me. And what was
that? I told you, this is just going to be me yelling at my cat.
So yeah, I was reading this article and all of these different words and I just felt my face go really hot and I was like, this is me. I just knew instinctively. It felt like so many things in my brain like all clicked into place. All these memories that I even forgot I had were like, coming back to me since I was like at nursery school when I was a toddler, all kinds of weird stuff. And I knew that it was right. I'd never felt like a girl growing up and I didn't feel like a boy either. And in fact, even before I knew about what any of these things meant, even about the concept of what it means to be transgender, even as a kid, before I knew all of that, I remember that I would sometimes have dreams about having a different body or whatever. And I'd wake up and ask myself, am I a boy? In my experience, if you're not trans, you probably wouldn't ask yourself that question.
That's a big egg move right there.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it was interesting because my first response to reading about this whole thing was like instant self-recognition on a really deep level. But then my next thing was to be like, what the fuck does that mean? I had all the same questions that you and I, Jordan, hear from people all the time. But the difference was that I couldn't escape it. It wasn't a subject to do with somebody else. It was me. I emailed my two closest friends at the time and told them straight away. Yeah, I think after that it was just a process of working it out and telling people gradually. When I was 14, I came out to my friends as bisexual. I don't use that label anymore because it's a bit more complicated than that. But having gone through that process of coming out, I thought that with gender stuff it would be exactly the same, and it wasn't. And I was like, oh, this is a bit more complicated because, I had to, I've spent years working out what I actually like, and you start to realise every time you step outside of your house or someone talks to you, or every time you're opening an account, like for shopping on the internet, or anytime you do anything, gender is brought into every single thing that you consume, and every time you interact with somebody on this planet, it's everywhere. And I did go through a bit of a phase of just being completely overwhelmed and like, wow, this is a lot to deal with.
It kind of permeates everything in life.
Yeah, and actually, like, to me, there's a lot of social things that I don't really understand anyway. But for me, this is just an extension of that. Now that I'm aware of it, now that I found words to explain my experience, I find it kind of funny in a way that our cultures are so heavily based around basically people's privates. And I don't know, it's kind of like really pagan or like, not that there's anything wrong with that, but and often people who seem to struggle with this the most when we have these discussions, and people who don't like it, they don't like this alternative way of being, I often find that they're so, they love the certainty, I think, of things being predictable and things being certain and simple. And I really understand feeling that way. But I think, and I was like that to begin with, but I just don't have that option. If I'm, like, I'm so much happier now. Like, I changed my name and my pronouns. I use they, them pronouns. I've stopped wearing things and doing things that actually I realise I'd only ever been doing to conform. Yeah, so I'm a lot happier and a lot more confident in myself. And I've questioned it over and over again, because I think in the media, these things are so sensationalized that you think that surely if I was one of these people, it would feel sensational, but it doesn't. Yeah, you can feel happy in finding this part of yourself, but at the same time, it's just as mundane as it must be for everyone else. Do you agree?
It's something I think I realized, but not actually clicked through my brain until you just said that. But I definitely kind of resonated with that a little bit, especially because, it, like you said, it's sensationalized. And so then when you actually get into the stride of presenting as yourself and learning about yourself and all this stuff like that, it's mundane. You're right. It's just another day in the life. It's your everyday. But to people that aren't in it, it's this huge sensationalized thing. So then you kind of question yourself on it because you're not sensational, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like that's one of the things that leads into a lot of our imposter syndromes, is the fact that you've got the media. The media always has these ideal representations of people and things, and you see it with feminine people, and when they're being held to the standard, or you have the hypermasculinity, you have all of these ideal standards according to the media, and that always down to your everyday person, your everyday life. You've got this mundane. It doesn't just affect just one thing or another. That's one of the intersectional issues that we have, is it affects everybody in a lot of ways, even down to our own gender identities and expressions.
Definitely. And I have to say, like, I feel that I've been able to, since learning about myself and detangling all of that stuff for years, I feel so often that I'm talking to friends who are not trans or non-binary, cisgender is the proper word, or cis for short. And so many times they'll be talking about something, and you can hear that they're not happy about it. And so often these things are really kind of insidiously tied to stereotypes and gender roles and stuff. And a number of times I've said to people, like, you don't have to be that way. Who are you trying to do this for? I know it's a small example, but I've still got friends, women, who don't want to have children, but they don't openly talk about it because they're so, and not as much as it used to be, don't get me wrong.
Well, that's
but
definitely
I mean,
still something, and I mean, it might be more prevalent where I am because of the predominant religion of where I live. It's definitely a big thing here. The shaming of women who don't want or have children. This was something on the other end here, right around the time when I first came out and I first started presenting as myself. And I have this friend in the cosplay community, and we had this conversation once, and he had just gotten through a really, really rough breakup from something that had ended up very, very toxic. And he was very upfront with me about what happened. And he said to me, because we'd had this communication, and he talked to me, he's like, I wish that I had your perspective on this, because I feel so ingrained into toxic masculinity that it ruined my relationship, because I felt like I wasn't allowed to have emotions or to respond to things in my relationship. And so I bottled them all up until I exploded. He was saying that he wishes he could be like a man like me, because I don't have those inhibitions, because they weren't pushed into me. They weren't ingrained into me. They weren't shoved into me, because I was raised differently. And having those conversations with cis people, it's really, you said it yourself, it's very insidious. And a lot of people don't talk about it, which is what makes it insidious, is because it lies beneath. And because it's looked down upon to talk about, people don't. Being trans and being non-binary and being the communities we have, a lot of us have had trauma. A lot of us have been through these things where we all talk and we all communicate, and we have a community. And so it's kind of shocking sometimes to go back and be in the cis world, so to speak, and just to hear these things. I'm like, wait, you guys don't like talk about that, or you don't hug your friends? And there's such a huge disconnect, because we've broken all of our stereotypes. We still deal with them. I mean, still today, I still have a lot of things in my head that knock around that are gender-based stereotypes that I have to deal with. I've spent so long fighting them and breaking out of them that getting back and communicating with my cis friends, I'm like, oh, that's a thing you guys struggle with every day.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. And I have to say, since I've come out, people don't ask me so much if I'm going to have kids or what my future's going to look like. And on the one hand, sometimes I feel sad about that because a lot of my kind of cis and straight, particularly friends and family, they get asked all the time. Even my own siblings, like they often are asked things about, what kind of future they want or who they're, dating and things like that. Whereas I feel like, on the one hand, I don't feel like people take an interest either because they're maybe awkward or unsure or just because it's less significant. I don't know. I do feel like that sometimes. But then simultaneously, I feel like I'm under less pressure.
Yeah.
I think for the same reasons that you said that, there is no path laid out for me. I've got nothing to resist because I've
Yeah.
already left all of that stuff behind.
You've broken out of those chains and you're an unknown quantity. Like, we're unknown quantities to people. What do we want? And I think a lot of times, at least especially when it comes to being non-binary, that a lot of people don't know what to do with that, because when trans people want more of that binary transition, they want that complete transition to whatever end that they feel is good for them, they just kind of switch their stereotypes in their head, which I think plays in a lot with what I've seen in the trans masculine community with a lot of the toxic, the trans misogyny, all the stuff like that. You can see it as they come in and they just kind of can switch your gender stereotyping. But when you come to non-binary, we're so unknown that there is no stereotyping outside of physical appearance. And so I feel like instead of thinking about that, they're probably more trying to type us in their head in other ways. I don't know, because I'm not cis.
So how long have you been out, Jordan? Talk about
I've been out for
your
2 years. I had my first hormone shot on March 5th in 2018. I went 2 weeks from coming out, not just to myself, but to an entire house full of my friends that I am trans, to being on hormones in 2 weeks. And I'm from a very religious part of the United States. It's not the South by any means, but I live in Utah. It's the Mormons. They're everywhere. They make our laws. I mean, it's very, very much part of the culture here. And I was raised Mormon. So I have 6 siblings, all from the same 2 parents. I was raised in the church and I have very distinct memories. And so, again, I'm from a town of 8,000 people in the middle of the desert in Utah. So I don't have access to a lot of things. I grew up in the 90s and early thousands. And so, the internet wasn't that much of a resource. I wasn't allowed on it very often. So I never had access to any of these things. So I didn't have words for any of the things I knew. The only thing I really knew about up until I was an adult, like in my 20s, was gay and lesbian. I have distinct memories of me being a tiny angry kid, 8-ish years old, of getting these huge fights with my mom because church on Sunday I wanted to wear the suit and tie. I didn't want to go out and do dance. I wanted to go play football with the guys. I wanted to go play soccer. I wanted to rough and tumble. And my mom would just be like, well, you're a tomboy and that's okay, but you still need to be pretty. I still need to put effort into myself. And I would scream at her, but I'm supposed to be a boy, which is wild to me since I didn't have the words for it. But even then I knew that something was off. And I had a very traumatic experience that went on for several years. And after that was over and I was in therapy and stuff like that, I just kind of, I guess, gave up on trying to fight my mom on that. And so I went very, very hyper feminine. And I got into makeup. I went to hair school after I graduated. I was very, 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 very feminine and into that. And I just was miserable. I was dead inside. And if you look at my older pictures, you can kind of see it in my eyes that, I'm smiling, but those I'm glossed over. And I struggled really, really hard with myself and my body and with sex. And I was married for 4 years. I had a kid. Like, I just struggled with it. I just was ashamed of my body and myself. And so after we split up, and I just was kind of on my own for a little bit. And so all this is going on with Caitlyn Jenner, and I'm kind of watching that. I want to be out there and I want to help people. And so I started to go to school to get a psychology degree so that I could help and provide letters for trans people to get surgeries or hormones or whatever they needed. I wanted to be a service and, good ally, all that, that jazz. And I just always was more in tune with following the trans community and trying to do what I could. And I always had just kind of this pit inside of me whenever I was getting involved in something. And then one day I was on Instagram and I found Jamie Wilson. I think Wilson's his last name, but I found Jamie. And I was like, wait, I can do that. And I started following him. And then I discovered Aiden Dowling and I started following all of these trans men. And I'm like, this is a thing. I can do that. And I just got angrier and angrier because I felt like I couldn't because I had the kid. I'm 26 years old. All of these things of why I couldn't do it. And I went to a party with my cosplay friends and we're all sitting there. And of course, this is prime Mormon territory. And this was at a place about 40 minutes away from where I live. And we start singing primary songs. And one of my friends goes, if I had been raised in a more progressive family, I'd be a lesbian right now. And I'm drunk. And I just kind of deadpanned and went, if I was raised in a more progressive family, I'd be a man right now. And I said it out loud. And I'd never even actually admitted it to myself yet. And so I just kind of sat there a little bit stunned at myself. And I looked around, the whole room silent. And I mean, there's 15 of us. And I looked to my left and my friend Lou was there. And she just bursts into tears. And she comes and she hugs me. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why are you hugging me? I'm fine. And she's like, I'm so sorry. That has to be so hard. I'm like, I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Totally fine. Totally in control of this. And so then later I'm driving home and I'm on the freeway and I'm just white knuckle driving the entire way home. I'm just angry about it. I'm like, well, why can't I be? Why am I not allowed to be happy? Why am I living for other people? And this is a big part of my life has always been life is short, live for yourself, make yourself happy. You're the only one that goes to bed with your thoughts. And so I'm going like I'm a hypocrite, I'm not even listening to my own self. And so the next morning I get up and I'm sitting in bed and I open my laptop. I'm like, well, maybe I'll experiment with being non-binary because I don't have to change anything. And of course, I'm still a baby. I know nothing about basically anything at this point. I just know that non-binary is a thing. So I start looking into it and I text my roommates and I'm like, hey, can you use they them pronouns with me? And I think I'm going to start going by Alex. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. And they've been super supportive. And so they immediately adjust. And I made it probably about 4 hours. And I discovered binders and I discovered the hormones and I went, no, this is what I want. This is what I want. And so then I'm a trans man. So I went with that. 2 weeks later, her name's Dr. Lucanar, Rex Lucanar. She was fantastic. She's a huge resource to the community here in Utah. I was able to get into her in 2 weeks. And she does this thing called informed consent. So I just went in and I spent an hour initialing 35 pages of this is permanent, this is permanent, this is permanent. This may not be permanent, just their hormones and things. You go through puberty again.
Yeah.
And so I initialed all of that, sat in that room for a little bit and walked out with a prescription. And I've never looked back. That is definitely the one thing that I have not ever doubted in myself was the decision to do that. So then I get settled into that. That was during the time which I was one of the admins for JTT, big support group. It was a generally good group to be in, especially as someone who's so brand new to it as I was. And I've learned most of what I know being in that group. It was in that group that as I settled in and the rush of the euphoria from finally finding who I am started to wear off and I got into that mundane part of it. I went, I don't feel right being male. It doesn't sit right with me still. I love the way that my body is changing and I love the way that I'm going to look and the potentials of things I have. And I definitely have the body dysphoria, but I don't identify as male. And so I kind of started looking into the non-binary things. And then Harris messages me one day and goes, hey, I kind of need help. And I asked them, I'm like, well, what's going on? And so they tell me about the agender group that they admined and asked if I wanted to help. And I'm like, wait, what's that? And the second I started reading it, it was like bells going off in my brain. I'm like, this is it. This is it. It just felt so right and so complete. And so going into there and then finding out that, my expression does not have to match my identity and that everybody's an individual, that group really brought me to where I am now and how I identify. And I mean, I think that was a span of about 5 months from point A to point B. So it was definitely a huge whirlwind and I felt like I just got thrown off of a balcony into a pool as I came out and went into the community because I mean I always felt like an outlier that I wasn't part of it, so I needed to maintain my space outside of the community as an ally. And so then when I was like, no, I'm not an ally, this is me, I just felt like I just got flat out dropped right in the water, right into the deep end. And there's sometimes I felt like I kind of went a little bit underwater a couple of times, but I've been mostly keeping myself afloat. And now that I'm confident and that I feel good about where I am and what I've done, I'm like, you know what, it's time to help other people. It's time to to show people that it doesn't matter how old you are or where you come from or what you've had in your past, that you are allowed to be you.
So I ran my Genders Together page on Facebook pretty much since around the time that I realised I was non-binary and started coming out and everything. But I did that quietly, like my name wasn't on the Facebook page. I didn't even tell any of my friends or family that this is what I was doing, I think, except maybe my best friend. And it was secretive, and I felt it was really weird. I was leading kind of like a double life for a while. And I was part of a networking group. I had a hair and makeup business for some years. I was part of this several networking groups actually, but one of them, a friend, she ran her area, and she said to me, "Would you come and do a talk with us? You know, maybe on something sort of hair or makeup related." And I was like, "Oh God!" I said, "You know, the things that I could suggest are so varied, and like, you know, the majority of people don't want to hear about hair and makeup for 20 minutes, especially like." business people. I was like, I know a lot about lots of different subjects, so I'm sure I could find something more interesting to talk about. And she was like, "Well, what do you know about?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I could talk about like energy vampires or empaths or like LGBT community." I said, "Oh, I actually run a page on Facebook all about gender identity, ha ha ha," and like said it, like just put it out there almost ironically. And she was like, "Oh, you have to talk about that." And I was like, "What the fuck?" That was a joke.
That was a joke, just like
And
me being, we should be a podcast.
yeah. Oh my God, if that younger version of me knew I was doing this now, they would just die. But yeah, so I drove home from that lunch meeting in the car, and I had this real strong moment of like, this is what I'm going to be doing with my life. And I was like, holy fucking shit. And it was a real moment. Like, it was like, I'm an introvert. I don't yeah, well, I know, but
yeah.
like with people that I'm close to, I never shut up, and I'm very annoying, as Jordan could tell you. But um no, and I
It's my
say that in a
favorite type of
positive
annoyance.
way. Um yeah, but no, the idea that I would kind of be going out there to talk about and educate people about a subject that's so difficult for people to learn about, even just from like a linguistic point of view, or just getting their heads around the concept, even if they're the most well-meaning of people. And that spans right from those people to the other end, where, you know, you've got a lot of people who don't agree with people having the power to make these decisions for themselves. Similarly, unfortunately, to, you know, like the gay rights movement not that many years ago, you know, they used to say that homosexuality was a mental illness. And
we're there in that fight right now.
yeah,
That's another thing that I've noticed when talking with my cis friends is the fact that they're so outdated in the terminology that they understand and believe to be an actual diagnosis. And it's not anymore, and it has been for a while. And that's just another thing that the communication in the community has shown that we have in relation to what they have, is that communication of everything we go through. As I got further and further into the community, I started noticing all of these behaviors that people with ADD and ADHD were talking about that I also had, that I thought were typical and across the board experiences of everyone in general. And that's when I noticed that they were not typical, and that there might be a reason why I struggle so much to stay focused and stay on task. And so then at the age of 28, I got diagnosed with ADD. And I never would have known that if I hadn't explored myself a little bit more in a community that is open to talking about mental health in a common aspect with each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the second that you don't fit a mold, you start questioning everything. It can be exhausting, but also I find it really fascinating. And number of conversations I've got into over the years with people through my page or our support group that we run for agender people without a sense of gender. That's me and Jordan. And, you know, the amount of conversations that have come up about all sorts of things that I've never even heard of before. And it's so fascinating, and I'm able to kind of start building this picture of myself in such a deep and complex way that I would never have done that before if I hadn't have come across our community. I know a lot of people think that having all of these words is so complicated, but in my experience, those things are there anyway. It's just that you're acknowledging them, you're able to name them and then talk about it.
So I'm still in, obviously, helping admin the agender group, but I also have my group, His at the Sis, and we ask you how you identify, because there's such a long, like, huge range that His at the Sis is more for everybody instead of like for that very specific identity. And so I have seen even just the other day, I saw an identity I've never seen before, and I had to look it up. I hopped over to Google and I looked it up, and it's the first time in 2 years that I've had that. I kind of feel that, and it was Libra gender, agender, but it's a fluid. So it's kind of like agender meets gender fluid, where you're agender most of the time, but you feel kind of more fluidity to, I think, if I remember correctly, Libra gender is a specific gender. So with me, where sometimes I wake up and I'm like, I do feel kind of like a man today, but most of the time I'm like, what's a gender? So it was even just recently, I was like, there's this word out there that kind of hits home to me a little bit. And so even those of us that are, in it every day and around it and talking about it, we still all the time are finding these new words and these new little subcultures that we have. And it's incredible to me to see all of these people that are opening up. And I've mentioned this a couple of times as I've talked to some people. I've had a lot of people come to me with questions and hatched a couple of eggs. But a lot of the times I kind of bring up that how differently it would have been for me if I had access to something like Facebook the way it is today when I was in high school. Facebook didn't really take off until I was a senior, so I was 18 years old. But like if I had these groups or these access to these things, like these words, and a lot of my life would be different now. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now. People bring up it's this fad, all of these kids are into it, they're just trying to fit in. I'm like, yeah, they're trying to fit in as themselves. And they have access to things that people in my generation, in our generation, never had. And it's wonderful. It's so exciting to watch all of these kids while they're still in this stage of their lives being able to find words, being able to find groups and communities and people that understand them and care for them, and these places where they can be safe, where I was completely alone. I had all of these things rolling in my head. I had no language for it. I had no idea that it was a thing. I thought that all these things were wrong with me. And of course, being religious, I dealt with a lot of that type of guilt. And it's just incredible to watch. So it's like a lot of people make these comments about like, or all these new things or all of these kids are getting, and I'm like, no, it's the access to information. I felt this my entire life. And for the first time ever, I have a word for it. So it's like we've been around. We just didn't have words for it. We didn't communicate. We didn't talk about it. We're ripping open so many boxes and so many topics that have always been so taboo. And we're just shredding everything and creating this new normal for the future. And I love it. I think it's great being able to see these kids. Of course, I have a little bit of that. I wish I'd been able to do that, but I'm happy that they have this access.
Yeah, me too. I follow quite a few different pages on Facebook and sort of keep up with other activists in our community as well. And there was one, I think it's by My Generation, which is Fox and Owl, a trans couple, and they filmed these two young lads, these trans boys at school, and they're both on hormone blockers, and one of them's about to start testosterone, I think. And the younger one was saying, he was like, he went into school and he went to this school and told them straight away, I think within a week or two of being there, and just said, look, I'm trans. And all of his friends were so supportive and there was no negative reaction. And I just think about like the fact that in the early 2000s, I came out as bi at school, and luckily I'm really tall and I don't take myself too seriously. So I've been able to take things with a pinch of salt most of the time, but I was still bullied at school, and it wasn't that long ago. I look now at kids, and even my brother, he's nearly 12 years younger than me, and even his and his friends' reaction to these kinds of things. And like my cousin's girlfriend, who is, I don't know, early to mid 20s, I can't remember her exact age, but even mentioning things to her, they just instantly know, they understand it's not a big deal, we could just carry on. And I think it's massively valuable. For all those people who aren't convinced, I think you would only need to see somehow or experience with us these situations of, you know, how difficult it can be versus how amazing it can be. I definitely see that the younger generation are a bit more relaxed about it. They don't have so many hang-ups. You know, I think knowing from young that these things are out there and not kind of being lumped with it later as an adult and expected to just instantly know what you're doing, be comfortable, and adjust your thinking. You know, I do think it's more difficult as an adult, like a lot more. In the years that I have educated, I've done workshops in secondary schools to go, you know, from ages 11 to 18. And I always find that the younger ones, the 11 and the 12-year-olds, I mean, they're so cute. And you're asking them these questions, and there's no kind of self-consciousness. And they're literally just there to learn, and they're fascinated. And they don't, most of the time, seem to have any preconceptions yet of like what's acceptable. They're just there to learn in this very innocent, like really lovely way. But the older that the kids get that I'm doing the workshops with, the more they're looking around to see like, oh, is someone going to answer? Because they know what they want to say, but they daren't say it because status and hierarchy and everything has started to matter, and looking cool as well is such a cock blocker of deep connection and empathy. And yeah, I see like the older these kids get, the more opinionated they become, and some of them come out with things that are not there. I can literally hear them speaking in their parents' voices, or in, you know, voices that have got nothing to do with them, and they've picked it up somewhere else, and there starts to be resistance and lack of care, and they start to justify, like I've seen a few and it's often, I hate to say it, but it is often the young lads who are trying to show off, and they definitely don't want to look like they care about anyone or anything.
Because caring is a weakness in society.
But they don't start off that way. You know, the 11 and the 12-year-olds, there's no division there at all. And actually some of the sweetest kids were the sort of 11 and 12-year-old boys who were still so childlike and charming. And I know that, you know, growing up is complicated enough as it is, but I do think that it was interesting to see such a disparity between these really innocent kids who just wanted to learn and kind of be everyone's friend, and they're so sweet, and then the older ones who kind of didn't want to go there and didn't want to learn and didn't want to have their perceptions or their feelings challenged at all. Although interestingly, I did teach some secondary school girls at a very religious school, and they were spellbound and they really wanted to get into it. They were very passionate about the whole subject. They wanted to know everything, and they really, really were emotionally engaged. So yeah, it's really strengthened my belief that the younger generations will do better, and that's why it's important to talk to people when they're young enough to be receptive.
I also want to preface this with prejudice isn't technically like a negative connotated word, but it can be. But prejudice is just something that you have this idea of, and you get those set in you by the age of 25. Like as you get closer and closer to 25, you become more and more set in those, and that's why it's so much harder to change the mind and the opinion of someone late 20s, early 30s, and beyond, because they're set. That's the way they've always thought. They're not going to change the way they thought, and that's the way the things are going to be. And that's kind of one of the harder things. And I feel like I'm in this really weird sweet spot just with my age specifically as we approach the end of the millennial generation and going into Gen Z. And the onset of the social digital age is because people younger than me are completely different as far as their opinion on the community in general versus the people who are the same distance but older than me, even just by a matter of 2 to 3 years. And it's kind of been very Twilight Zone-ish for me sometimes to see that disparity. I'm also, I guess, a little lucky being in the community, the type of community I am outside of my identity, as far as with cosplay and the geek community and the nerd community. And But I'm generally always been in the underdog community. So I guess I just have like a much different experience. So when I run into those people from my high school that were in that jock or that popular little cliques or whatever, I find them to be a lot more set in the, what's the word I just wanted to use there? They're much more in the seeing it as something that isn't natural or any of those other excuses they all have than people who were usually picked on or in the minority groups in school. Just one of those, I guess it's a class thing. It could be a class thing, but it's intersectional. Everything, all of these things, all of these cultures, all of these different aspects of everybody's lives, they're all similar, just different experiences, if that makes sense. Which is why it's called transection.
Yeah, definitely.
All of these things bleed into each other.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting hearing you say about, belonging to these other subcultures. I don't know what group you would have assigned me and my friends at secondary school, but I guess like we all had pretty good grades and worked hard, but we had a lot of fun and we were quite outspoken as well. So yeah, I have no idea. Maybe there isn't really like an American high school drama equivalent.
The theater kids are there, and they are that. I was actually such a different, like, I was kind of an anomaly when it comes down to the high school experience, the secondary experience there, because of the things I was going through, dealing with my trauma, dealing with falling out of my religion, and the added trauma of my therapy experience. But I was just in such a very, very weird place, both mentally and physically. This was during the 2008 crisis. My family lost a lot. And so I went from us being really well off to us not being well off while I was in high school. And so it was just kind of like me wanting to maintain my status as that, and then trying to deal with that, trying to deal with my very ill mother. I mean, my mom was a very good mom, but when I was being raised, she was very ill. So I didn't get the mom that my older siblings got. And so the mom I remember existed in the dark of her room underneath her blankets. So I was just I didn't really have that strong parent presence because my dad also worked overnights and out of town. I mean, like 2 hours out of town. So I didn't really have a parent. I was in high school. I was dealing with puberty. I was dealing with a gender crisis, even though I didn't realize that's what it was, but, a gender crisis, and trying to live up to the expectations that my 4 older siblings had already set for me at the school, and trying to do drill team and dance and debate and trying to be cool and trying to do all of the regular teenage things while dealing with all of these serious mental illness problems that I had that weren't being acknowledged or treated. So I was friends with everybody. So I would come in the mornings and I'd go to the library. And I'd hang out with my theater and debate geeks in the library for the morning. And then I'd go through classes. And then for lunch, I would eat in the hallway outside of C Hall, in between the cafeteria and the drafting class, with all of my Metal HUD friends. And then after school, like when I wasn't at drill team or at my studio dance, I would be with the party friends. And my mom was always like, "Oh, I just worry about you being with these friends. Don't want to be a bad influence." But I was the bad influence. So, I had so many friends, but I just never really had the one group. And so it's like high school was weird for me, and I had kind of a moment with that today because it's our 10-year anniversary, or our 10-year reunion since we graduated. I graduated 10 years ago next month, and we created a group about a couple of months ago to get all of us together to plan it, and we had set it for August, but now we might be pushing it back because of everything going on. But we had a whole conversation in there today, and I'm talking to people I haven't talked to in 10 years, and it's just kind of like remembering all of these things from high. It's just kind of a weird thing. It's very surreal to me. It feels like a movie I watched and not an experience I lived. I'm not sure if that's like a universal experience for
Yeah.
people with similar stories to mine, or if that's just me. But I very much feel like a lot of my past life is probably how I'm going to refer to it, as someone else's, as a movie I watched, as something I watched on a screen. I didn't actually live that, and I don't know, maybe that's a dissociation, but it's just, yeah.
I was thinking about that exact thing the other day. A friend of mine was messaging and we were talking about, I think we were talking about dissociation or something similar. And I said, well, I've been five people already. And I don't mean that in like a,
Uh-huh.
you know, a dissociative disorder or, you know, DID. I can't remember what that stands for. But yeah, I don't know, but I also, I think of the kind of spiritual thing and the also the is it your cells replace themselves every 7 years, and also I think um, in some of the Eastern cultures they talk about like the first seven
Uh-huh.
years of life relating to your root chakra and stuff like that. But yeah, I always think of myself as like before 7 and then between sort of 7 and 14 and then 14 to 28 and then till now. And I do feel like each of those are like completely different chapters, and like I don't feel like it happened to me. I feel like it happened to somebody else and I
Yeah,
just remember it.
yeah, that's what it feels like. It's I have I've always separated it into, like, before trauma, and then after trauma, and then married life, and then the chaotic 3 years after that, and then me, my current stage, which started at just before I turned 27. But I mean, even my marriage, it just feels like this whole other person. And I mean, there's 5 years of my life I spent with Jose, and four of those married. And sometimes I don't even remember it. I mean, there's 5 years of days, and sometimes I have a hard time just picking any of them out. And which, I mean, obviously I've struggled with depression since I was 12, 13 is when it really got bad. So a lot of my life I deal with trauma related memory loss. And so it's just kind of hard because all these people will talk about these memories, and I'm like, I know I was there, but it's kind of like hazy, or I don't even remember it at all. But then the memories I do have are very vivid. So
Mm.
it's kind of like lucid dreaming sometimes when I think back on my life.
Mm. Yeah, it's the same. And I don't know if you relate to it, but sometimes I look back at situations that I was so like heavily involved in emotionally, and I don't remember those feelings at all. And I can almost like it's almost like I'm watching this younger version of myself doing all these things and getting involved with like the wrong people, and I remember like how kind of passionate and messed up and tangled up in these things that I was. At the same time, like I don't know if it's related to before I came out and knew who I was, but I often felt like I was failing doing the things that I was supposed to be doing, that actually none of it was that authentic. And although I was kind of involved in like toxic relationships and stuff, I just didn't want them to leave. I just didn't want to be kind of exposed and vulnerable. I just kind of wanted to stick to the prescribed way of living so that I could kind of avoid, I think, how I really felt and who I really was, and that actually I couldn't follow the traditional way of living because it didn't work. And actually, I wasn't that into it either, even though I was desperate for it to work. Yeah, I always felt like an imposter. You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier
Like,
in relation to being trans and non binary, but I felt far more
yeah, I
imposter
felt
syndrome
like I
before
was
before I
on
came out.
autopilot, maybe. Like I was a robot. I was going through the motions of what people expected.
Yeah.
I mean, I got married at 19. I had the kid. Like, I did everything that was supposed to be expected of me in the culture that I living in. And but it was like, if I went through the motions and I did everything right, I could push this down so deep inside of me that I would never see the light of day, and then maybe one day I'd be happy. Obviously, that didn't work, and I am exceptionally happier now. But
Mm.
it was definitely something that I was like, if I push this down hard enough, if I wear enough lipstick, if I do all of the right things, if I'm a good wife, if I follow every little thing to the letter, I can push it down, tape it shut, and I can get some of that sweet, sweet serotonin. And obviously, when you do that, you're pushing the truest parts of yourself away.
And I think having that lack of belonging, coupled with this, quite frankly, like a very toxic traditional way of living and the pressure, I almost feel some like possibly, or I wonder, were we more susceptible to, these extreme versions of what life is supposed to look like, because we didn't have a clear sense of, something else, or something that was real for us. Because I feel, also growing up in a quite a misogynist world, unless I was validated by a boyfriend, and unless I was accepted by him, it almost didn't matter how I felt, because what was I without all of that? And I wouldn't be complete without all of those things. And I was told, like, unless you're going to be like a wife and a mother and all of these things, like, what's the point of you? You can, we'll send you to school and you can be clever, but ultimately you're not going to really use it for much, probably. I do wonder if I experienced such an extreme of that, because I didn't really have any connection to any of that, and it definitely didn't suit me. I mean, I guess you would also say that nobody really is right for something that's that toxic anyway, but I do wonder if I was so desperate to conform and to achieve all of those things because they actually felt so far out of my reach for a reason, that I ended up getting the worst versions of those. What do you think is one of the most like common questions that people ask you about being non-binary?
There's the ever wonderful classic, why can't you pick a gender? And then how do you know? And I mean, well, my most common response to the why can't you pick a gender is the fact that I can't even pick what pair of socks to wear every day. But it's because, I mean, I picked no gender. And it's not something, this isn't something you pick for yourself. This is just something you are. And then in response to the how did I know, it was that's the euphoria answer. That's the statement of euphoria. When you find something and it feels so right that you got excited about. Like, it was when you introduced me to agender, and I was like screaming, running around my apartment, like I found it. It just feels a click inside of you, just clicks together. It feels right. It brings peace. I base a lot of my decisions, a lot of things I do in my life, on whether or not it brings me peace. And my identity, my lack of gender, so to speak, is based on the fact that I heard it, I found it, I researched it, and I felt at peace about it. I'm like, that's it. That's the bitch. And so those are the ones that I most commonly run into. What about you?
I don't know. I think that rather than it being a question, the thing that people say the most to me is that they don't want me to be angry with them if they get it wrong. Like if they misgender me, or I mean, I changed my name quite a long time ago now, but if people are adjusting to like a new name or something, the response I get most of the time from people I know and I'm talking to is that they kind of apologize even before they've done anything, and they often say like, oh, I'm going to try really hard, but please don't be angry, and they're really scared. Like I always say to them, I think it comes from a good place that they don't want to upset you. I think that comes from a really good place, but as I've said time and time again to my friends and colleagues and other people, I'm not worried about people making a genuine mistake, and I've done that as well. It's not like I was born with this manual and I'm like completely flawless and I've never fucked it up, and like I can just look down my nose at people like, oh yeah, I'm really good at this and I'm just waiting for you to fuck up just so I can just sort of like dismiss you. Yeah, and I've said it to myself like accidentally in passing if I'm saying something silly, and I'm like, oh, I mean not now, I haven't done that for quite a while. The thing that I always say to people is like, if it's a genuine mistake, I'm really not bothered. We can just move on. It's really not a big deal. And to be honest, people do it to me all the time, whether I'm in a supermarket or at a restaurant. People make assumptions all the time. The thing that I'm actually most concerned about is that I might occasionally come across somebody who is angry or aggressive or who's going to be really unkind. That's what I worry about. And also I think you can come from a really progressive place, and I think you can come out and still find somebody who you have a very good relationship with, and they can still react in a way that is really hurtful and really damaging, actually.
We run into the possibility of a reaction like that or a violent reaction every time we come out to someone. And I am far more worried about that than I am worried about my friends or family slipping up every once in a while. And another thing is, we say this a lot, but to anybody listening that has, that I may be their only trans friend or that may have just found us by accident, have no, to their knowledge, trans friends. When this happens, don't make a big deal out of it, please, especially if you're in public. Correct yourself, move on. Do a quick sorry if you need to. That'll help you feel better. But please, just don't make this a big deal. Because then you start making a deal like that, people start looking at you. You're now outing your friend to everybody around you. Let's not do that. Let's correct yourself, move on.
I think also, like, you know, that kind of panic, I guess, comes from a good place in that you care, but at the same time, it does take confidence to be that one on the outside and not know what you're doing, but try anyway. Like, that does take you outside of your comfort zone. But also, I think when you're us and you've decided to kind of take a chance and put yourself out there and come out to this particular person, you're already so exposed. It's almost like you've left the house naked, and your friend is saying like something about your outfit, and they're going, oh fuck, you're naked. Oh, I completely forgot. I shouldn't have mentioned the clothes because you're naked. And you're like, oh my god, please do not bring any more attention.
It's like just one of those things that like just don't draw attention to it. Let me slip away quietly and then go put some clothes on.
Yes, but I think it's that being naked at the beginning of your kind of being out, and it's and being naked is that being authentic.
You feel very,
you know,
very raw.
You already feel so exposed just being yourself, and that's the way that you need to be. I was going to say something about that actually, because I think about, you know, earlier you were talking about wanting to help people and bring awareness and share, you know, our stories and everything. But I think about how difficult I've found so much of this before, just in myself, just to exist, just to talk to people, to leave the house, just to be acknowledged and seen by other people in a way that went against how I felt was so hard. And it's only like whilst I was traveling, I didn't come out to everyone that I met. People that made friends with me on Facebook, a few of them noticed my bio and then would ask me about it, and then I would know they understood what it meant, and we could have a heart to heart and share that. But you know, during my traveling, I just decided that I was like, I'm on my own, you know, out in the world, mixing with people every day. I don't know who they are or where they've come from or what culture they, you know, I don't know. I'm just surrounded by strangers all the time, so I didn't feel safe to do that. I, you know, felt like being misgendered all the time was like a massive slap to the face, and it stung every time. And obviously people were not saying these things to upset me, or, you know, it's just an automatic thing that they were saying. And then whilst I was traveling, I just really accepted that I wasn't going to kind of make an example of myself amongst a bunch of strangers when I didn't have anyone around. You know, in Australia, they're not quite as progressive as they are in the UK. It's not terrible, but it's not great. Also, being in Indonesia, homosexuality, I think, is frowned upon, and they have talked recently about making it illegal there again. So yeah, I just really got used to kind of not being out particularly about my gender identity. I might talk about like an ex-girlfriend or ex-partner. Yeah, I got really used to not coming out and being anonymous again, which was a really interesting experience. And along with that, I just got used to people making their assumptions about me. I don't know about you, but it took me a really, really long time to come to terms with that being something that I was going to have to continue to deal with, like, for years. Because at the beginning, I was so uncomfortable. Once I'd realised and I had the words to put to my experience and how I felt, I was like, oh well, if I can come out and just kind of let people know, I can live authentically all the time. And actually it doesn't happen that way, does it? It's an ongoing thing. It's potentially every day that you're coming out.
Yeah, and it's especially with me being a regular at a bar and stuff like that, and being cis-assumed is just something that's been kind of a weird adjustment to get to, because I've also noticed, looping way back to the beginning of this conversation, that when people think I'm a cis man, the things they will say. And so then I get put into these situations where I'm anonymous, I'm safe, and this person just dropped and said this thing, and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. But then I have this dilemma of, do I say something or do I leave? How do I deal with it? And it's just kind of weird to me how differently people treat you when they think you're one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed, I'll just say it, white cis men are the worst. It's, oh man, it's been eye-opening for sure. But it's just like going to situations, it's constant. You're constantly thinking about what you can or can't say, or what parts of your identity you should let people know about. When I shave, I tend to get a couple more of the she, hers than I normally would, because currently I only get it from people that knew me before. Do I correct them? Do I make a deal about it? Do I move on? Do I not say anything? And it's constant, and it's something that when I think about it, it kind of gets me down a little bit, thinking about the fact that, do I have to spend the rest of my life thinking like this? And it's just like that's another one thing that people don't often think about, is the fact that you don't come out and then all of a sudden everything's different, everything's better, and everything's changed, and then you never have to deal with this ever again. It's constant. And like with the fact that I decided that transition was that a medical transition was something that I wanted and was good for me, I have to take these hormones for the rest of my life. This isn't just something I do for a couple of years and then everything's fine. I have to do this every week for the rest of my life. So this will never not be something that I have to think about, or not be something that I can pull away from myself. Like, I am trans, I am transitioning, and I have to deal with this every day of my life for the rest of my life. It's not just something I can forget and move on from. Like, I have to think like this. I have to deal with this. I have to gauge my situations and whether or not I'm safe. And it's from how I lived before. It's not too much different because before it was, don't leave your drink unattended, don't go out at night alone, always have some form of weapon with you, know how to hit a jugular, like all of those. It's just moved from that to this. And so it's having to live basically in a constant state of fear is not a fun thing, and not something I wish on anybody, which is why it's important to have these conversations, to bring the human aspect to it, not the medical book, not the DSM, not anything that makes it this stale subject. Like, we're humans. We have lives and personalities and jobs and families and friends and animals and all of these things that make us us. But this is something we always have to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's partly why we congregate as much as we do, because I think just a 5-minute interaction with somebody who gets it is such a moment of relief.
To be able to have a conversation with someone that doesn't always end in talking about my identity. Like, I'm open. I don't mind talking about it. It's something that I am very proud of personally, but I'm exhausted. I don't want to always talk about it. And I had one guy that got, I mean, this guy decided that he was in control of my life or something. Like, it's just some guy at the bar with a bunch of mutual friends. And he took it upon himself to bring up my identity every single time we talk, but then would tell me that I talk too much about it. And then so one night he cornered me in the parking lot as I was leaving, and oh man, I'm still mad about this, and was like, hey, I just want you to know that this is coming out of a place of love, but I feel like you shouldn't talk about what you are. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, it's just like you always talk about it. And I'm like, you always bring it up. And he's like, well, I'm just saying that you should be more careful, and I don't want to have to go out one day to go find your body somewhere, like, as your friend. And I'm like, one, you're not my friend. Two, what the actual fuck? And oh man, I'm so angry about this. But it was just like, you become an object to people sometimes. And like, I talk about it when people ask me about it, when I feel safe, because like, I want to talk about it. Like, I want to show people these parts of me and the things I have to deal with all of the time. But I am not your object. I am not this thing you can dictate to. I am not, like, I'm still a person.
Yeah.
I'm an adult. I make these decisions on these communications myself. And if you think I don't know the danger that I'm in for existing, like, boy, it's stupid. It's I don't know. It's just kind of infuriating. That's just kind of something, an interaction that's kind of stuck with me. We know. We know. We deal with it every day.
Yeah, welcome to the party, buddy.
Yeah, like, weird. Like, thank you, 40-year-old.
Oh, I never thought of that before.
White cis man with a very terrible mullet and mutton chops. Like, for your valued input on my life.
Oh, yeah, do you know what? And I have had that a lot with like male, like guys that I've dated, actually. But there's this bargaining that goes on, and they're like, oh, maybe you should like deal with it differently, or maybe you shouldn't talk about it, or but this is what it means to me. And I just think, fuck off. I don't care. It's not about you.
Exactly. Like, that was
It's not
absolutely a
about
statement he made to me, centered on himself.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the fact that I could get hurt. It was about the fact that he'd have to go find my body or identify me. I'm like, dude, you're not even my friend like that in the first place. But it's just like, are you telling me that you're a threat? Or are you telling me that I'm an inconvenience to you? Like, tell me what the honest answer is to why you're saying these things to me.
Yeah. And there's always that little question in the back of your mind that's just like, is the only reason this person didn't stay with me long term because they couldn't be open about it, or is that person not friends with me because I mean, I guess you would say that you wouldn't want to be friends with them anyway. But I think it's easier to say that than to live it, I think about people that I've come out to since I've come home from traveling, and then I've messaged them and I said, listen, we never really talked about it because I wasn't open about it whilst I was traveling, but this is the situation. And I'm waiting for people that I've known for a year, who I've been very close to, who I've lived with, to, what their reaction is going to be, knowing that I have to come out for my own good and to be authentic and not force myself to be uncomfortable with people that I think I have a good relationship with. But you never know what's going to come out of their mouth, or, if that friendship's going to be over. And particularly, like, I don't know if it's the same for you, but people that I've been intimate with, I do worry that, especially the men that I've dated, will they react negatively? Will I threaten some sense of their kind of masculinity? like for them?
Yeah.
And will they react badly, and would they take that out on me? That's something I definitely worry about.
I was again, serial monogamous, relied on relationships to validate myself over here. But right when I came out, because it happened so quickly, there wasn't like a lead into it. And so then all of a sudden I had these guys that I had been talking to pretty seriously that all of a sudden, yeah. And so I was very, very kind of concerned about it, just because, again, being raised, you know, carry a knife with you, all that fun stuff, because men are violent. And it was very, very scary. And I'm lucky that two of the ones that I was mainly concerned about, one of them still Snapchats me regularly and makes fun of my beard because his is better. But and another one is one of my absolute best friends now. And I'm really glad that I was able to have it. But oh boy, there was definitely some nervousness leading into that and coming out to them. And the one that's now one of my best friends, it's his birthday. And so I just sent a little video to his girlfriend because she's putting together this happy birthday montage from all of his friends, and it's just kind of weird to think about, and you know how we met and stuff. But like, I've definitely had that. How are the people I've been intimate with, or was potentially going to just be intimate with, how are they going to react? And I have that with Travis, because there's been a couple of times that I have come across his path, and I always wonder, because I look so different, I always wonder if he'll look at me and make the connection and what he'd do. I am
So he doesn't know, and you're not.
know, yeah, at all. And so it's like I am 5'5" on a good day and have a max speed of like 9 miles an hour.
That's better than me.
What would I do in this situation? And so that's definitely just kind of like this big terror, because I feel like he definitely would not react well to it. Or who knows, maybe he comes out as gay. Who knows? It's definitely like that is one of that's higher up there on my list of things I am terrified of right now, is running into him or another one of these people that I've dated and then being like, oh, time for violence. Which that was supposed to be funny, but it was not funny. Because it's true, it's reality. But I mean, I could always just go for the knees. And I mean, now that I've felt the excruciating pain of being school tapped, then I definitely can use that time to get away. Oh, that's a good one. That was something nobody warned me about.
Just explain for the listeners who don't know what we're talking about.
So, I live with two people, Stephen and Liz, that are married. Liz is my best friend, and she was my neighbor for a couple years growing up. And back in 2016, I moved both of them in with me, and we've been together ever since. My family. I was their officiant for their wedding almost 2 years ago. And so, yeah, we're just like this cute little family. But basically, Stephen and I are absolutely assholes to each other. Love each other, but we're assholes to each other. And so, probably about 6 months into hormonal transition, this incident happened. And one of the big things that happens to your body in hormonal transition, the way I'm going, in transmasculine, is your clit will grow. And when it grows, it kind of loses a little bit of its protection there. And anybody that knows anything about it knows exactly how many nerve endings are in that thing. So I'm standing and I'm getting laundry out. We have a stacked washer dryer, and I'm getting my dry laundry out or something. And Stephen walks by and scroll taps me. And I hit the ground. And I thought my life was ending. I was nauseous. I was like, I'm going to throw up. Everything. Like, this is excruciating. And I'm just like whimpering on the floor, and he's laughing. He's losing it. And I just didn't expect it. And I'm laying on the floor, and I just kind of like look up to him as soon as I catch my breath. And I'm like, I need to call so many classmates back from high school back and apologize. Oh my God. It was something. I don't recommend it.
No.
I don't recommend it. But whole new perspective to that. And I'm like, I Steven's made sure that I have the full puberty experience, and that was one of the things I had to suffer through.
Getting punched in the dick.
In the dick. But it's okay, I got him back. The first time I got my first Packer, I was very overzealous for my 5'5" white self, and didn't really think about the fact that it's a Packer, it's supposed to be flaccid, and I ordered a 6-inch one. I looked as ridiculous as you think. So,
just for everyone who doesn't know, a Packer is a prosthetic sort of penis and testicles that you wear in your trousers or your pants.
There's all kinds of different ways you can do it. A lot of people make them homemade out of socks and nylons, or ripped up shirts and stuff. But this was it was like $7. I got it on Amazon, and it was pretty decent looking, and it's also very elastic is a good word. So, one of the very, very first things I did with it is I kind of held it where it's supposed to go, and I knocked on his door, and he opened it, and I helicoptered. And it's very stretchy, so this thing went from 6 inches to like 2 feet, and is just windmilling around. Well, he's made sure to put me through some of the more unsavory parts of puberty. I've definitely subjected him to the 15-year-old teenage boy. I
love that. It's amazing.
And so then, of course, for people that are familiar with me or follow me, I recently got a very, 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 very expensive version of one of these that is also an STP, which stands for stand to pee. You can figure out what that means. And my first thought was I got a helicopter with it, but unfortunately I was a lot more realistic with this one, and where it is has more functions than just being a Packer. It's hollow, so it didn't really do very well. But it tried. But of course, so every time I get a new dick, I have to helicopter with it, and that's just kind of become my thing. I'm probably not the only one. But
and Stephen has to put up with it.
Yeah, he's kind of stuck with me here for forever, and he just has to go with it.
He's on bro duty now.
Yes.
Oh my god, amazing. Oh. Right. Is there anything else that you want to ask me before we wrap up?
You busy later?
No. Thank you for listening to the Transection podcast. If you want episodes straight to your inbox, you can sign up to our mailing list through our webpage at www.muxharrishill.com/transection. Join us next time for more educational dick stories. Until then, build bridges and have fun.
You can find us on Twitter at TransectionP, on Instagram at Transection Podcast, or on Facebook at the Transection Podcast.